As you see, I have on my FAMU hat, Florida A&M University, just in case there are any of you Wildcats out there from Bethune-Cookman, Rattler, baby. And I'm going to talk about a Rattler, one of the most celebrated ones, Mr. Julian Cannonball Adderley. And we're going to specifically deal with the work he did in the 60s. First of all, a little background. He and his brother were tight, Nathaniel. Nat continued to play the cornet as their father did, and of course, Cannonball switched to the saxophone. And while in New York, they had groups together, mostly a quintet rhythm section, the two brothers up front. That very first quintet was not very successful, and so they split up and went their own way. Cannonball, did gigs here and there, and actually was in Miles Davis's group and on one of his most pivotal albums, Kind of Blue. And Nat did things under his own name that were also kind of successful. However, after leaving Miles Davis for the very last time, Cannonball formed another quintet with his brother, and this one was quite a lot more successful, both financially and musically. They would often expand the group to a sextet, one of my favorite albums, Live from the Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach, featured the great Yusuf Lateef. And I also know that the saxophonist Charles Lloyd also participated with the brothers, making the group a sextet at times. Various rhythm section people came through, from Bobby Timmons, Hal Galper, Victor Feldman. Did I mention Bobby Timmons? I guess I did. George Duke actually was in one of the later groups, but the group I remember more than any other was the group that featured Joseph Zawinul. That was the group that I remember more often. And then bass players, Walter Booker and so many others. But then although he had his 4 or 5 different bass players in the group, I think I may have heard him with 1 or 2 German bass players. His drummers went from Roy Haynes to Roy McCurdy, and most of the groups that I heard perform live were the ones featuring McCurdy on drums, and Victor Gaskin on bass, Joe Zawinul on the piano, and of course the brothers down front. I never heard any of the live performances of either of the sextets, although I was blessed to have met Yusuf Lateef much later in my life. I remember going to FAMU in let's just say somewhere in the late 60s, okay? And there was this dance craze going on called the African Waltz, and it was a full orchestral soundtrack featuring Cannonball Adderley, and the title of the tune was African Waltz. And at least at FAMU, we even had a dance developed called African Waltz. We were celebrating not just the music, but also an alum of Florida A&M. That was one of the first popular hits he has, and that was a single hit, and it was so big of a hit that they actually recorded an album of I think 8 or 9 tunes with African Waltz as being the title of the album and one of the central tunes on it. That tune had first been recorded by John Dankworth, a British saxophonist, composer, and educator who was married at the time to the jazz singer Cleo Lane. So Dankworth had a big hit with it in the UK, and Cannonball says, "Hey, I like this thing. I think I'll borrow it and do some real big orchestrations with it and release it under my own name, and he did, and it was quite successful. And this started a pattern for him of finding his way into a jazz repertoire that people like. They can shake their hands, they can clap, and they can actually dance to and shake their butts, all the while listening to this jazz. Cannonball was getting into the spirit of jazz as it was back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and etc. Man, he was really quite a popular character, and his personality came through so richly on the live recorded, such a live from the Lighthouse. Near the end of the 60s, he started experimenting with electronics. By that I mean electric bass, electric piano, synthesizers, that kind of thing. That probably became the pivot point, the launching pad for Joe Zawinul's later work as the leader of the Weather Report with Wayne Shorter. But those experimentations with electronics had started with Cannonball Adderley, and it produced some fine-tuned This Here With My Bobby Timmons, Work Song, and Sack of Woe, and who could forget Mercy, 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 written by an Austrian pianist named Joseph Zawinul, which was probably the biggest hit Cannonball ever had. And although black folks were bopping to it and going, mercy, 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 little did they know that that song came from the mind and hand of an Austrian classical pianist. Oh yeah, jazz is infectious like that. It most certainly infectious like that. So let's understand that what Cannonball did is bring the spirit of the groove and dance into jazz, brought it back into the jazz. And he started his experimenting with electronics, the Preacher, Operation Breadbasket, all those things he did with Jesse Jackson, getting near to the end of his life. He was experimenting, but he always kept that Southern tradition of, baby, it's got a groove. Or like Duke Ellington would say, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got no swing. So we say, thank you, Cannonball, for bringing the groove and the dance back to jazz with the work you did in the 60s. Thank you very much.